Though a relatively small nation, Britain had large supplies of coal to power steam engines. It also had plentiful iron to build the new machines. A large number of workers were needed to mine the coal and iron, build the factories, and run the machines. The agricultural revolution of the 1600s and 1700s freed many men and women in Britain from farm labor. The population boom that resulted further swelled the available workforce. Britain had been a center of the scientific revolution, which had focused attention on the physical world and developed new devices for managing it. In the 1700s, Enlightenment thinkers promoted the idea of progress through technology. The encyclopedia compiled by the French philosophe Diderot, for example, included articles on technology as well as social and political reform. In the 1700s, Britain had plenty of skilled mechanics who were eager
Technology
to meet
was
the
an important part of the
growing
Industrial
demand for new
Revolution, but
practical
it did not cause
inventions.
it. After all, other societies such as the ancient Greeks or Chinese had advanced technology for their time but did not move on to industrialization. In the 1700s, trade from a growing overseas empire helped the British economy prosper. The business class accumulated capital or wealth to invest in enterprises such as mines, railroads, and factories. Britain had a stable government that supported economic growth. It built a strong navy to protect its empire and overseas trade. Although members of the upper class tended to look down on business and Religious
business people,
attitudes also
they
played
did not
a role
reject
in
the
the
great
growth
wealth.
of British industry. New technologies in the iron industry were key to the Industrial Revolution. Iron was needed for machine and steam engines. Producing high-quality iron, however, required large quantities of fuel. In the 1700s, the British turned to coal for fuel. In 1709, Abraham Darby began to use coal instead of wood for smelting iron, that is, separating iron from its ore. Darby's experiments led him to produce better quality and cheaper iron. In 1779, his grandson Abraham Darby made the world's first cast iron bridge. In the years that followed, high-quality iron found more and more uses, especially after the world turned to building railroads.
Important changes also took place in Britain's largest industry, textiles. Indeed, it is this industry that the Industrial Revolution first took hold. In the 1600s, cotton cloth imported from India had become increasingly popular. British merchants tried to organize a cotton cloth industry at home. They developed the putting out system. They distributed imported raw cotton to peasant families who spun it into thread and then wove the thread into cloth. Skilled artisans in the towns finished and dyed the cloth. Under the putting out system, production was slow. As the demand for cloth grew, inventors came up with a string of remarkable devices that revolutionized the British textile industry. Among the inventions was John Kay's flying shuttle. Using Kay's device, weavers worked so fast that soon they outpaced spinners. James Hargreaves solved that problem by producing the spinning jenny in 1764, which spun many threads at the same time. A few years later, Richard Arkwright invented the water frame, using the water power to speed up spinning still further. Arkwright, who had begun life as a barber, was typical of Britain's hard-working and highly disciplined entrepreneurs. The new machines doomed the old putting-out system of manufacturing. They were too large and expensive to be operated at home. Instead, manufacturers built long sheds to house the machines. At first, they located the sheds near rapidly moving streams, which provided water power to run the machines. Later, machines were powered by steam engines. Spinners and weavers came each day to work in these first factories, as these places brought together workers and machines to produce large quantities of goods came to be called. Early observers were awed at the size of the output of these establishments. As factories sprang up, the production increased. Entrepreneurs needed faster and cheaper methods of moving goods from place to place. In the 1700s, individuals made improvements in local systems of transportation. Some capitalists invented turnpikes, which were privately built roads that charged a fee to travelers who used them. Others had canals dug to link rivers or connect inland towns to coastal ports. Engineers also built stronger bridges and upgraded harbors to help the rapidly expanding overseas trade. The great revolution in transportation, however, was the invention of the steam locomotive. It was the invention that made possible for the growth of the railroads. In the early 1800s, pioneers like George Stephenson developed steam-powered locomotives to pull the carriages along the rails. The world's first major rail line from Liverpool to Manchester in England opened in 1830. In the following decades, railroads got faster, and railroad building boomed. By 1870, rail lines crisscrossed Britain, Europe, and eastern North America.
Other inventors applied steam power to improve shipping. Scottish builders made the first paddle-wheel steamboats to pull barges along canals. In 1807, an American, Robert Fulton, used Watt's steam engine to power the Clermont up the Hudson River. But by the late 1800s, steam freighters with iron hulls were carrying 10 to 20 times the cargo of older wooden ships. As the Industrial Revolution got underway, it triggered a chain reaction. In response to growing demand, inventors developed machines that could produce large quantities of goods more efficiently. As the supply of goods increased, prices fell. Lower prices made goods more affordable and thus created more consumers who further fed the demand for goods. The Industrial Revolution did more than change the way goods were made. It affected people's whole way of life. In the 1800s, a tidal wave of economic and social changes swept the industrializing nations of the world.
To picture England before the Industrial Revolution, we must imagine a nation that was the most powerful on earth, and yet possessed no real factories. A country that had just one large city, London. For the most part, England was a quiet and lovely land of farms and rural villages where only the sounds of weather, of animals, and the distant ringing of church bells broke the stillness of the landscape. Yet England was a land of great social inequality. A handful of aristocrats owned most of the land and possessed by right of birth nearly all of the incredible wealth it yielded. They built magnificent palaces for themselves and filled them with treasure. While an enormous lower class, most of whom owned no land, struggled to survive, often paying rent to the wealthy landowners. These poor people sometimes faced severe malnutrition and even starvation. They usually died young. With this as a background, let us find out what great changes were to occur as a result of industrialization. The first Industrial Revolution began in England for several reasons. First, she possessed rich deposits of iron and coal, resources essential to industrialization. Second, England had many reliable sources of water power. And third, numerous colonies around the world supplied her with abundant raw materials, like this cotton. And at the same time, they provided an enormous captive market for her manufactured goods, like this cloth. These colonial markets helped to stimulate the British textile and iron industries, and in the beginning, it was the wealth produced by these two industries that drove the Industrial Revolution. During the mid-18th century, the growing demand for goods such as the iron hand tools seen here resulted in greater competition among manufacturers. And as costs of production rose, manufacturers sought new ways of meeting the increased demand for their products without raising prices.